In this video, I will be providing you with a roof that will work for a cathedral or vaulted ceiling for our home edition add-on. And for those of you new to the channel, I usually show you the entire roof completed, and then we take it apart and put it back together. And of course, this usually helps for educational purposes. And if you remember in the last video, I had a 4 and 12 or a 5 and 12 roof pitch on the home edition and a 6 and 12 roof pitch on the existing house, which provided us with a lower ridge height. So here you can see where the ridge height is going to be a little higher, and this will match the existing plans that I created if you want to go back and take a look at them. And all of this stuff should be in a playlist. If you can't find it for whatever reasons, let me know. So let's go ahead and start taking it apart. There's the roof with our roof rafters, 2 by 10, and there's a good chance you could use smaller materials, maybe even a 2 by 4 here. However, since this video series is meant to provide us with a few different examples, you're going to see them, and one of those will be using the same materials for the entire roof, which will be 2 by 10 roof rafters. And we are going to be using 2 by 10 roof rafters for one reason and one reason only, because the span is short enough to accept 2 by 6 roof rafters, I'm guessing, unless you live in an area where it snows, and that will be for insulation. We're going to need the distance here to be able to put R30 insulation in, and if you need to put thicker insulation in, then you might need to use larger roof rafters. So keep that in mind when you are designing and building your project. And I believe our fascia board here is 2 by 6, along with 2 by 4 lookouts and notches cut into the gable roof rafter for the lookouts, along with our gable studs and a little shelf here. And the shelf can be designed a few different ways. I will be going over that in the video. So let's go ahead and start putting this thing back together. We are going to need a ridge beam, and the size of that ridge beam can vary. I think we're using a 4 by 10 here, and it is going to be supported by some 4 by 4 posts, and I'm not going to be installing any building hardware. However, you can use straps and post base connectors, post cap connectors, anything you need to connect everything together or that you feel is going to provide you with benefits to make the building stronger. And here's something you might or might not do, and that will be to extend the ridge a little further to provide additional support for the fascia board. However, you could always cut this off here and then just put a block here. And of course, the ridge beam doesn't need to go all the way to the end over here either. You could always put a 2 by 10 or a 2 by 12, or even use a 2 by 8 from here to here, or even have a 2 by 8 ridge go from the edge of the beam to here, and then frame this section like you would a regular hip roof without this detail in here. I just thought I would throw this in here to give you another idea of something that you can use if it's going to work for you. So let's go ahead and install our roof rafters, and that will include shaping the blocks at the top and filling blocks in when needed, like this one here. Take a look at the nice straight row of blocks here, and keep in mind that you might need to install some additional blocks on the outside here. However, that will depend upon the finish of the building, and you might even need to install some joist hangers here depending upon where you're at or what the structural engineer is going to require. And that would be a good time to point out that this roof rafter here can go all the way down and sit on top of the plywood or the roof sheathing. However, this one here and the fascia board will need to have enough space so that you can install the roof shingles underneath the fascia board. So the roof shingles will go underneath this section of the fascia board. However, this section up here will need to block off anything from entering the building. And you can always move this up if you want, or get rid of it. You can have that go back farther, but most of the time you're going to need something to stop the birds and the insects from entering into the attic. And another thing you might need will be to have a section of the roof sheathing removable for the roofer. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for the roofer to install the shingles here. And that's exactly what we did on the other side. I made a section of the roof sheathing removable. Now this does not mean that you nail this down like the rest of the roof sheathing. Just simply put a couple of nails in it to hold it in place so that the roofer can remove it, install the shingles, and then the roofer should nail it. However, that's probably not going to happen. The roofer is probably going to use the nails that you provided and simply tack the piece of sheathing down so that they can install their shingles. And of course, if this problem does not make sense to you, it will if you nail this piece of plywood down and you're going to be the one who's roofing the house. Let's go ahead and zoom into the fascia board and the ridge here to give you an idea of how the extended ridge will be supporting the fascia board, along with the lookouts that will be notched into the last roof rafter there. Another view of the front. And again, you can always put a block there, and you can always check out a couple of the other videos where I would have put a block here. And you might need to reposition the lookouts if you're going to just put a block there. And a view of the other side with our shaped blocks at the top, along with making the tails of the roof rafters smaller so that they don't stick down past the fascia board. Now you could always use larger fascia board to avoid this problem. And of course, now would be a good time to point out the fact that we used 2x4 trusses on the existing roof and 2x10s on our home addition, which means that the top of the roof is going to be a little higher than the top of the other roof. And I should also point out that the existing overhang is 2 feet, where this one here is 18 inches. And you could always extend this further down if you wanted this to match. For example, you might be able to install about a 3-foot overhang here to match the fascia board over here and have the height of the roof where it meets the fascia board to be the same height. So another thing to think about, and here's an example of the difference in the height, along with what the roof rafter would need to look like and how the tail would need to be shaped so that it's not sticking past the fascia board. Next up will be the gable studs. We'll need to install 16 inches on center. And of course, you could always space them closer or further apart if acceptable with your local building department. And let's not forget the backing we're going to need for our drywall. And that will be a 2x4 installed here. And of course, this 2x4 can provide you with a better connection between the roof rafter and the gable studs. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at our shelf. And in this example here, I installed the drywall first, notched it around the roof rafters, and then installed a piece of OSB on top. And depending upon how you shape the roof rafters will depend upon how big this notch needs to be and how much additional work it will require for the drywall finisher. And again, this is just another way to do it. You could always get rid of the drywall, install the plywood, and then install the drywall underneath the plywood. Just screw it into the plywood and then leave the top of the shelf unfinished or paint the plywood. And of course, in some cases, this will not even be a possibility depending upon how large of a shelf you're going to have here. And next up, let's take a look at the backing here for our drywall. This will be the ceiling backing at the corner here. Pan back, you can get a better view of it here. And then let's take a look at the other side and then go ahead and take a look at the other end of the building where we will be shaping the bottom and the top of the gable fill studs so that they can be spaced 16 inches on center. And let's not forget that anywhere where we are going to be installing insulation, and that will include this side of the building and the other side of the building, then it might be a good idea to space these out so that the insulation will work to your advantage. In other words, eliminate as many cuts as possible. And now let's go ahead and install our fill rafters. And like I said before, you could always stop the beam here and then put a 2x12 ridge in or a 2x8 ridge in and then go with smaller roof rafters. I don't see where that would be a problem. Along with the shaped ridge that will represent the top of our roof framing on the other side so that the top of the sheathing will be nice and flat, or as flat as we can possibly make it. And you might need to notch a section of the sheathing out before you install the fill so that it's not creating problems for the piece of roof sheathing that we are going to install here. So you can see here where this needed to be notched, otherwise the sheathing would have came up a little further, and that could have created a void or a gap in between the new sheathing and the existing sheathing, and that could have created a problem for the roofer. And of course we have a support board that I have installed here, and you could always change your design and shape it to meet your needs. And basically what I have here is about a 2x12 with an angled bottom sitting on top of a 2x4, and here you can see the angle. The angle here is going to match the 6 and 12 roof pitch, and it is going to help provide a little more support for our ridge beam. And here's a good example of how the board that are going to attach the new roof to the existing roof can be shaped to fit, and everything needs to die into a flat plane. It needs to create a flat surface here. Something else that you will need to consider will be ventilation and access to this area. And of course that might require an access hole along with some type of a structural support post in the existing wall framing to transfer the load from the ridge beam all the way down to the foundation. And this might also require additional blocking or joist underneath the floor sheathing, so keep that in mind, along with a larger window header here, again to support the weight of the ridge beam or the weight of the roof. So in this example here, the weight will transfer down to the header and then transfer down through our double trimmers on each side down to the foundation. And again, additional blocking might be required in this area. And obviously I am not covering every single item that you can run into. However, I'd be glad to take a look at anything that you have in the form of a question or anything that I might have missed in the video that I didn't spend enough time on or that might have been a little confusing. So let's go ahead and wrap this video up by installing the roof sheathing on each side there. Take a top view of it. And as I just mentioned, any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment area or email them to me. And as always, if you enjoyed this video or learned something from it, let us know by hitting the thumbs up button.